So, since the passing of the Queen, lots of people have been coming out to speak about how they are indifferent or unsympathetic that the Queen is no more with us. I don't really know how I feel about that just yet because I haven't taken time to really process that. But today we're going to be watching Jordan Peterson comments on the Queen's passing. And just for context, Jordan Peterson has been described as a controversial intellectual. Put those two words together, and that is what we're about to watch right now. I'm excited for this one, or I think the best word is I'm curious for this one. And without wasting your time, let's get to it.
How could the death of the Queen affect the boundaries between English communities around the world?
How could the death of the Queen affect the boundaries between English-speaking communities?
His body language is very good. I must commend that right off the bat.
Around the world. Well, I suppose it could go one of two ways. One is that, and this would be a terrible thing, it's such bad timing in some sense, I think, for what happened today to have happened. I'm a great admirer of the constitutional monarchy system. I think there's a wisdom about it, especially the way that your country has managed it, which is more, it's worked better than how any other country's managed it, maybe ever. That's really something. There are obviously monarchical systems, constitutional monarchies still left in Europe, but they're kind of a pale reflection of what you've got in the UK. And when Tammy and I were in Kentucky a couple of months ago, we were invited there by the former ambassador from the US to Canada, and she and her husband were fundraisers for Donald Trump. And he runs a coal mine, so you can imagine why he's Republican. And
okay.
And so we were at the Kentucky Derby, which is quite the show. The Americans, they're very theatrical, man. They can put on a show like no one else. And the Kentucky Derby is definitely a show. People wear the most preposterous outfits, these wild lime green suits and these amazing sort of Victorian costumes for the women, and they're all dressed up. There's like 160,000 people at the racetrack, and it's quite the spectacle. And we were up above the racetrack, about 3 floors, in this glassed-in cafe. And the second day we were there, Trump was going to come to the cafe, to the restaurant. And I had flown out that morning to give a commencement address at this conservative college in northern Michigan. And then I flew back, and just after I got there, they closed the airport. So I just got in. They closed the airports because the president is coming to town. The former president, but they still call him the president. And so really the whole city, in some real sense, was locked down. And then I got to the Derby, back to the Derby, and just in time, because they're going to lock down the whole Derby. So that meant 160,000 people, no one gets in or out. And then the army came in, and there was like 300 guys in camouflage, quite armed, and they were taking up their stations. And this is like 3 hours before Trump showed up. And then the Secret Service came in, and by that time I had made it upstairs to the restaurant where Tammy was, and she'd been there waiting, and everyone was buzzing away about the fact that Trump was
I'm just so interested to see how this relates with the Queen.
coming, and the atmosphere was electric, and
it's very good storytelling though, very, very good storytelling, keeping everybody captivated.
I thought, sitting there, this must have been what it was like to be, well, around the Kennedys, say in the 1960s, that level of fame. I've been around famous people a lot now, and there are definitely tiers of fame, there's
Yeah.
There's not famous, and that's
The first tier.
normal. And then there's celebrities that are maybe known locally and nationally, and then there are celebrities that are known internationally, and then there's celebrities like the Queen, who everyone everywhere in the world knows, who among famous people, they're hyper famous. And Trump is in that category. And he's a very strange person in that category, I would say, because he's not just famous for being president, which is already something that makes you pretty damn famous, but he was really famous as a businessman before that, and as a nouveau riche sort of businessman, and as a kind of brash entrepreneur and a character, and he was very famous for that. But then he got even more famous as a TV celebrity for like 15 years, and that's actually really hard, regardless of what you think about it ethically, or whether you think the kind of entertainment that he did,
He was still famous.
that
That's
he
the
involved
basis.
himself in, was worthwhile. I don't care about that. That's not my point. My point is that managing that successfully for 15 years is exceptionally unlikely and difficult. And he was extremely famous as a consequence. And that was sort of laden on top of his fame on the business front. And then he became president. And so that's a lot of fame, man. And when that much fame surrounds you, your life is very weird. And the probability that people are going to respond to you in the normal way that helps keep you sane is very low. Especially maybe if you're also an intimidating person to begin with a bit of a proclivity, let's say, towards disagreeableness. Because maybe then you chase away the people who would have enough sense to tell you when you go a little bit too far.
True.
Anyways, we were up there in the restaurant, and the place was just buzzing, and then Trump came in, and you could just feel the energy, the electric energy, and I thought, this is not good. This is too much, man. This is too much for anybody to bear. And the thing about the monarchy that's so cool, in the United States, there's the judiciary and the legislative branch and the executive, that separation of powers, and the checks and balances that are part and parcel of that, and that's a bright system. And then you also have the states, and they have their power against the federal government, and that stops anything from becoming too tyrannical in principle. But here, and in Canada, although less so in Canada, because we're, modern and trying to dispense with the monarchy, modern, confused, dim-witted, and untraditional, and casual and careless. And then we have the French-English problem.
Oh, I think he's Canadian. I didn't know that. Peterson.
Which makes things more complicated on the monarchical front. You have 4 divisions. You have executive, legislative, judicial, and symbolic. And the monarch holds the symbolic weight. And that's really smart because it separates it to some degree from the political weight. You see what happens in the United States is, well, first of all, is the president tends to turn into the czar. Because they have this idea in the United States now, like first lady. It's like, what the hell is that? We don't have that in Canada. Nobody knows anything about Justin Trudeau's wife. And that's been the history of Canadian politicians. It's like, just because you're Justin Trudeau's wife doesn't mean you're queen. But in the United States, it's like, well, Hillary Clinton, maybe she's queen. And that's partly because there is that demand for the symbolic weight that the leader should manifest. And you also see that to some degree.
But does that affect the people negatively or positively? Because someone can argue that as a first lady, they've been providing services that are beneficial to the nation too. I mean, that could be another argument. I'm just saying, I'm not saying that's what I think or what I agree with. I'm just saying that's the other part of the argument.
In the United States, which is a star-worshipping culture, obviously, with the glitterati and the royalty of Hollywood. And it's better put there. It's better put there in the entertainment section, even though that's also somewhat dangerous because it tends to elevate actors into pronouncers of ethical virtues, say. But better there than in the political realm. Trump, he's like king and president all rolled up into one, and that's just too much. And so I really admire the monarchical system, and I think that for whatever reason, the UK has done a wonderful job of maintaining that. And I think a very economically canny job too, because I know the economic analysis indicate that the royal family generates way more income than they spend. Because they're a major, and everything they're associated with here is a major tourist attraction. It's this tradition that you have here, this monarchical tradition, is something that's tremendously attractive to people who don't have that, Canadians, for example, Americans, and because it's so theatrical and so unique. And then you had Queen Elizabeth, who, man, I mean, that's quite the woman there. How many, 13 prime ministers? And so you had someone around to intimidate all your prime ministers. That's a really good idea, and I'm sure she did.
Keep them in check. I think that's the best word, not intimidate, to check them.
Did a fine job of that, And so, yeah. And you can imagine how useful it was psychologically in some sense, for the Prime Minister, who has monarchical temptations in some sense, like Trump did, to have to go on a regular basis to this remarkable person who'd seen this immense span of political history and confess in some real sense, right? And to be subject to her cautious and wise judgment, because I think she was a woman who was traditional and cautious and wise in the highest degree. And there were scandals in her family, but like you have a family, if people knew what your family was doing, don't you think there'd be scandals? And so, but she was remarkably free of scandals over that entire period, and that's a hell of a thing to manage for 70 years. And so, well, so what will happen now? Well, the most likely thing is that...
So can we ask if the Queen is part to blame for what her family did? Can we ask that? I don't know, because I've heard a lot of people speak about the Queen, what they did to Africa, India, several parts of the world. People have attributed all of those to the Queen, and her passing seemed insignificant to these people. But he's also made a point here that, says it was from the family, not directly from her, Let me know what you guys think. This is getting interesting. I'm going to bring more on this topic. Let's break it down.
Your monarchy will disintegrate like most of the other ones have. I'm not saying that will happen. I'm certainly not saying I want it to happen. But because that sort of thing is so hard to maintain, especially in the modern world, and because you need someone so remarkable to manage it, the probability that you'll get another one is relatively low. And so I wish your new king the best, that's for sure. But maybe you'll get lucky, and maybe your monarch, and maybe with your support, will rise to the occasion, and your country and the rest of the British Commonwealth will recognize that what they have in the shared bonds that unite them based on English common law and the great democratic tradition that's so much a function of this country, and this country really in particular. I mean, you're the birthplace of both Canada, the US, Australia, New Zealand, India, these amazing countries, these free, democratic, productive, generous societies. It's quite the accomplishment. And I see in England and in Europe, but in England too, in Great Britain, such apprehension about that, such refusal to note the greatness of your country and its contributions. I mean, no one in the United States ever talks about the fact that the UK was the country that eradicated slavery. That only happened once in the whole history of the human race. And your country did it. It took 175 years. And a huge...
Another argument at this point is they were a part of it. I don't know if they started slavery, but someone's going to say they were a part of it. And they eradicated slavery. So, kind of like an equilibrium at this point. You did it, and then you eradicated it. We can say it's at a point of equilibrium right now.
Huge economic. Yeah. It was your country and the great people who were spearheading that movement at the time that established once and for all on the political and economic front that was not to be tolerated. And then, it took a while for that idea to spread everywhere. It still hasn't, because there's plenty of slaves in the world. The estimate's 30 million at the moment, by the way.
Still, which is scary.
There are very few people who will come out forthrightly and say that it's right, that it's okay, that might makes right.
Yeah,
and your country was definitely one of the moral forces in the world, the primary moral force on the political front, who established once and for all that was no longer acceptable. And so, and yet, mostly what characterizes a fair bit of self-image in Great Britain is shame. And every country has things to be ashamed of, but not every country also has things to be proud of. So what do we think? What's going to happen with the Commonwealth? Well, maybe we'll wise up and recognize that we have something absolutely precious to guard. And then maybe we'll guard it. But to do that, we're going to have to defend ourselves against unwarranted accusations of guilt. Not that there's not something to be guilty about, because we're all the beneficiaries of the atrocities of history, and we have to atone for that in our personal behavior. But by the same token, man, you're supposed to separate the wheat from the chaff and not just call it all chaff. And when you look at your own history, you think, we stumbled plenty, but we still walked uphill. And you, in your country, you can say that more than most.
That was actually very good. Yeah. People have called this man insensitive. Yeah, on different topics he's spoken about, lots of people have called him insensitive, controversial. People just directly just say he's stupid and disrespectful. But from just this one speech, I feel like he presented a point with logical reasons. You don't have to agree everything he said. I don't agree everything he said, but does it mean I don't like him, or does it mean I hate him? No. If I don't agree, it just means I have to bring more points that counter what he says. I just have to bring a better argument to counter what he said. And he said it in a very respectful tone, well composed, and he's such a very good storyteller, I must say. He got asked the question, and because of how he captivated the audience and the listeners, even the interviewer couldn't ask more questions. Yeah, that was actually very good. A very nice angle to look at things, very nice perspective. He shed light on the situation in a different way that I wasn't expecting him to. But I appreciate that, helps us see clearer. Anyways, let me know what you guys think of that video. Jordan Peterson comments on the Queen's passing. If you want us to bring follow-up videos or more videos like this on the channel, feel free to let me know in the comment section. Send me links, send me messages anywhere, Instagram, Facebook, everywhere. I'll try my best to reply. Anyways, it's the end of this one. Don't forget to smash the like button and subscribe if you're new to the channel. I'll catch you on the next one. Have a wonderful day. Peace.